Wait. Before you continue watching this video, pause for a moment and answer one uncomfortable question. Have you ever noticed that the kindest people are often the ones who suffer the most? The ones who give the most are the ones who get betrayed the most. The ones who try to be fair are the ones who get taken advantage of. And yet society keeps repeating the same message like a hypnotic spell. Be kind, be generous, be selfless. But what if I told you that blindly following these rules can quietly destroy your power? For centuries, people have been taught that goodness automatically earns respect, that if you treat people well, they will treat you well in return. But history tells a very different story. Powerful thinkers understood something that most people refused to see. One of them was Niccolò Machiavelli. He observed kings, rulers, generals, and political leaders for years, and what he discovered was disturbing. The rulers who tried to please everyone lost their power. The leaders who trusted too easily were betrayed. The generous ones were replaced by those who understood how the world truly works. Because human nature does not reward blind goodness. Human nature rewards strength, awareness, and strategy. This is the uncomfortable truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. People rarely respect what is always available, and they almost never respect what cannot defend itself. Think carefully about the people around you. There is always one person in every group who is too nice. The one who always agrees, the one who never argues, the one who sacrifices their time, energy, and boundaries for everyone else. And what happens to that person? They become useful but not respected, trusted but not feared, liked but never taken seriously. Because when goodness becomes predictable, it stops being a virtue. It becomes a weakness, and weaknesses attract predators. This is the first psychological principle you must understand if you want to navigate the real world without being quietly exploited. Goodness without boundaries is exposure. When you constantly show people that you will forgive everything, tolerate everything, and accept everything, you reveal something extremely dangerous. You reveal that there are no consequences for crossing you. And once people realize that, something subtle begins to change. They test you, first with small things, a little disrespect, a little manipulation, a little pressure. If you tolerate it, the behavior grows slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize something painful. People are not treating you the way you deserve. They are treating you the way you trained them to treat you. This is why many intelligent people eventually reach a turning point in life, a moment where they finally understand something Machiavelli understood centuries ago. Respect does not come from being endlessly good. Respect comes from controlled goodness, from knowing exactly when to give and exactly when to withdraw. But before you learn how to do that, you must first understand the second dangerous truth about goodness. And this one is even more uncomfortable because it reveals something most people will never admit about themselves, even the people closest to you. Now here is the second uncomfortable truth most people refuse to see. People do not just notice kindness, they measure it. And once they understand how much you are willing to tolerate, they quietly begin adjusting their behavior around that limit. This is one of the most overlooked psychological dynamics in human relationships. At first, it never looks like exploitation. It looks like small favors, small requests, small compromises. Someone asks you to help with something once, then again, and because you are a good person, you say yes. But something subtle is happening beneath the surface. Every time you say yes without hesitation, you are teaching people something about you. You are teaching them that your time is flexible, your boundaries are negotiable, and your tolerance is high. And once people learn this pattern, the dynamic begins to shift. They stop appreciating your kindness and start expecting it. What was once generosity slowly becomes obligation. This is why many of the most giving people eventually feel exhausted, resentful, and misunderstood. Not because they were wrong to be kind, but because they never understood the psychology of how kindness is perceived. Human nature operates on a strange principle. People value what feels scarce and respect what feels strong. But when kindness is unlimited and constantly available, it stops feeling valuable. It begins to feel ordinary, predictable, guaranteed. And once something feels guaranteed, people unconsciously stop respecting it. This is why some of the most agreeable people slowly become invisible in social hierarchies. They are present, but they are not influential. They are helpful, but they are not respected. Because influence is rarely built through constant agreement. Influence is built through controlled resistance, through the quiet ability to say no when necessary, through the calm confidence of someone who knows their boundaries and refuses to abandon them for approval. Think about the people who command the most respect in any environment. It is rarely the person who tries to please everyone. It is usually the person who is calm, selective, and difficult to manipulate. The person whose kindness feels intentional rather than automatic. Because intentional kindness carries power, automatic kindness invites control. This is the psychological trap that many good people fall into without realizing it. They believe that the more they give, the more they will be valued. But in reality, the opposite often happens. The more predictable your generosity becomes, the easier it is for people to rely on it without gratitude. And over time, the respect slowly disappears. This is why strategic thinkers throughout history understood something critical about human behavior. They knew that goodness should never be unconditional in a world where intentions are not always pure. Not because people are evil, but because people are naturally drawn toward advantage. When an opportunity appears with no resistance, many will take it without thinking twice. That is not cruelty. That is human nature. And once you understand this truth, you begin to see relationships differently. You begin to realize that boundaries are not barriers to kindness. They are what protect it. Without boundaries, goodness becomes a resource others can quietly consume. With boundaries, goodness becomes a choice that carries weight and meaning. This is the moment where many people start to reclaim their power. They stop offering themselves endlessly to everyone around them. They become more observant, more selective, more aware of the subtle ways people test limits. And this awareness changes everything. Because once people sense that your kindness is controlled rather than automatic, their behavior toward you begins to change. But there is still one more truth about goodness that most people never fully understand. And this final insight is the one that separates those who are constantly used from those who quietly command respect wherever they go. And this brings us to the final truth about goodness, the one that separates those who are constantly used from those who quietly command respect. Real power does not come from abandoning kindness. It comes from controlling it. Because there is a critical difference between being good and being harmless. Harmless people tolerate everything. They absorb disrespect to avoid conflict. They sacrifice their boundaries to keep others comfortable. And they believe that endless patience will eventually earn appreciation. But powerful people understand something very different. They know that kindness without limits slowly erases respect. Think about the individuals who naturally command attention when they enter a room. They are not the loudest and they are rarely the most aggressive, yet something about them creates an invisible boundary that people hesitate to cross. That presence is not built through cruelty. It is built through controlled kindness. When they give, it feels deliberate. When they help, it feels intentional. And when someone attempts to exploit them, they do not react with anger or emotional drama. They simply withdraw access to their generosity. This quiet discipline is something thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli understood centuries ago. They observed that power often comes from restraint rather than constant dominance. Because the moment people realize that your kindness is not guaranteed, something fascinating begins to happen in human psychology. Their behavior changes. They become more careful with their words, more respectful with their actions, and more aware of the boundaries around you. Not because they fear punishment, but because they understand that your goodwill is not something they can casually take advantage of. And this is where your transformation begins. You stop trying to prove your goodness to everyone. Instead, you become more observant, more selective, and more aware of the subtle ways people test limits. You begin choosing when to give, rather than reacting automatically. Over time, this shift creates something extremely powerful, a reputation for controlled strength. Now I want you to do something simple but meaningful. Write this affirmation in the comments. My kindness has boundaries. Because from today, your goodness is no longer something people can quietly exploit. It becomes something they must respect. You will still be kind, but you will no longer be predictable. You will still be generous, but you will no longer allow manipulation to disguise itself as friendship. And once you master this balance, something remarkable happens. The same world that once tried to use your kindness begins to respect it. So remember this carefully. Kindness is not weakness, but kindness without awareness can become one. The real power lies in knowing when to open your hand and when to close it, when to give freely and when to step back. Because the moment your goodness becomes a conscious choice rather than an automatic habit, the rules of every relationship around you begin to change. And if you want to continue mastering the psychology of power, human behavior, and strategic thinking, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next lesson will reveal another truth about human nature that most people spend their entire lives never understanding.